Zeal Education Society, redefining excellence.
Hello everyone, myself Khushi Sanjay Bansode from Zeal Institute of Polytechnic, Narhe, Pune, from DSY Civil Engineering branch. Today my topic is cross-section of single broad gauge in track embankment. This project was guided by Ms. Harsha Shinde. So, before going into main topic, let us first discuss what are railway gauges. The gauge of a railway track is defined as the clear minimum perpendicular distance between the inner faces of the two rails. There are four types of railway gauges. The different gauges can be broadly divided into the following four categories. First, broad gauge, which has width of 1676 mm to 1500 to 24 mm or 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 0 inches. Second, standard gauge, which has width of 1435 mm and 1451 mm or 4 feet 8.5 inches. Meter gauge with width of 1067 mm, 1000 mm and 915 mm or 3 feet 6 inches, 3 feet 33 by 8 inch and 3 feet 0 inches. Narrow gauge with width of 762 mm and 610 mm or 2 feet 6 inches and 2 feet 0 inches. Then the factors affecting selection of gauges are: first, traffic condition. If the intensity of traffic on the track is likely to be more and a gauge wider than the standard gauge is suitable. Second, development of poor areas. The narrow gauges are laid in certain parts of the world to develop a poor area and thus link the poor area with the outside world developed. Third, cost of track. The cost of railway track is directly proportional to the width of its gauge. If the fund available is not sufficient to construct a standard gauge, a meter gauge of a narrow gauge is preferred rather than to have no railways at all. Fourth, speed of movement. The speed of a train is a function of the diameter of the wheel, which in turn is limited by the gauge. The wheel diameter is usually about 0.75 times the gauge width, and thus the speed of a train is almost proportional to the gauge. If higher speeds are to be attained, the broad gauge track is preferred to the meter gauge or narrow gauge track. Fifth, nature of country. In mountainous country, it is advisable to have a narrow gauge of the track since it is more flexible and can be laid to a smaller radius on the curves. This is the main reason why some important railways covering thousands of kilometers are laid with a gauge. Then, advantages and disadvantages of different railway gauges. Narrow gauge railways usually cost less to build because they are usually lighter in construction, using smaller cars and locomotives as well as smaller bridges, smaller tunnels and tighter curves. Narrow gauge is thus often used in mountainous terrain where the savings in civil engineering work can be substantial. It is also used in sparsely populated areas with low potential demand and for temporary railways that will be removed after short-term use, such as for construction, the logging industry, the mining industry or large-scale construction projects, especially in confined spaces. Broader gauge railways are generally more expensive to build but are able to handle heavier and faster traffic. Now let us see what is a broad gauge. In modern usage, the term broad gauge generally refers to tracks spaced significantly wider than 1435 mm. Broad gauge is the dominant gauge in countries in Indian subcontinent, the former Soviet Union, Mongolia and Finland, Spain, Portugal, Argentina, Kyle and Ireland. Broad gauge of 1676 mm or 5 feet 6 inches, commonly known as Indian gauge, is the dominant track gauge in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Argentina, Kyle and on Bart, which is Bay Area rapid transit in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is the widest gauge in common use anywhere in the world. It is possible for trains on both Liberian gauge and Indian gauge to travel on each other's tracks with no modifications in the vast majority of cases. This is the standard cross section of single broad gauge line in embankment. Thank you.
Zeal Education Society, redefining excellence.